All right, boys and girls. In science this week, we're going to continue learning about ecosystems, and we're focusing now on the food chain. So, as we're learning, as we're reading, I want you guys to be asking yourselves questions, making connections, and then we're going to answer some questions at the end. All right, guys. So, all ecosystems function naturally with a food chain in place. A food chain is a hierarchical series of organisms, each dependent on the next as a source of food. It shows the energy flow of an ecosystem. Food, nutrients, and energy all move and flow throughout the ecosystem, passing from life form to life form in a continuous cycle. All living things need energy to grow and survive, and energy comes primarily from food sources. The food chain demonstrates how nutrients and energy are passed along. The food chain has four essential key players. The primary consumers are typically the smallest and are herbivores, such as rabbits, geese, or squirrels. Primary consumers eat plants and other autotrophs, otherwise known as self-feeders. Likewise, a secondary consumer eats animals and other insects, the primary consumers. The chain flows then to a tertiary consumer, which eats other animals. The fourth and final is a decomposer, such as worms, bacteria, and mushrooms. Decomposers will break down organic material. All of the organisms work in a continuous cycle of energy, each dependent on the other. During the energy transfer and flow of the food cycle, energy is typically lost at each level whenever the organism is eaten. The producers at the bottom of the food chain typically receive their energy from sunlight, and then primary consumers come along to eat the producers. The organisms increase in size as the food chain flows to the top, but more than half, sometimes almost 90%, of the energy is lost along the way. Therefore, primary consumers are typically more efficient within the food chain than a tertiary consumer. For example, a hawk is a tertiary consumer that eats only other animals. The hawk will eat a smaller organism, such as an owl, which is a secondary consumer. The owl, though, ate a rabbit previously, or a primary consumer. When the hawk completes a life cycle, decomposers, such as worms, will consume it. There is a constant cycle of consuming and producing occurring within ecosystems, and the organisms within the food chain vary. All right, guys, so now that we've read it, what we're going to do is you are going to go through and mark some symbols. So when you come to something that's interesting on your reread, you're going to put an exclamation point. When you're unsure or confused by something, you're going to put a question mark. And when you find something that you think is super important, you're going to put a star. Now, when you come across power words, the vocabulary that we've been using and learning since week 1, you can highlight them yellow. So, for example, when I see a term like tertiary consumer, I know that that's a power word. I know I need to know that. Green, key phrases and definitions. So when I see, let's see, let's go up here. Okay, primary consumers are typically the smallest and are herbivores. I might highlight that in green. Okay. Now, you're going to fill in some questions you had while reading, like, I wonder why rabbits only eat vegetables. and summary of what I've read. So now you're going to take everything that you learned and put it in your own words here. Question 1, what is a food chain? How does a food chain function? So you're going to go back to the text, restate the question and answer it in complete sentences. Question 2, what is a decomposer? And list 2 examples. And question 3, provide an example of how the food chain works. So I want you to come up with your own example of a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and a decomposer that you think you could find in an ecosystem. All right, so here's a sample annotation. This is what it could look like when you're done. We've got some green highlights, we've got some yellow highlights, some stars, some exclamation points, and some question marks. All right, guys. So when you turn in your assignment, I expect to see that the work is written all over, that you've answered your questions. And next, I'm going to link your notebook pages so that you can fill in a sample food chain. All right, so now we have our interactive notebook. So the way this works is you use the slides on the side here to edit. So the first thing, we have our power words, ecosystem. So what you do is you click in here and you can add your own text. So highlight where it says type in the definition, and then you're going to add your own. An ecosystem is blah, 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 blah. Now, boys and girls, I'm not expecting you to do this whole thing right now, but you're going to be working on this throughout our unit. And I would like this to be finished by the end of our unit. So I'm going to collect these from all of you. So please make sure you keep a copy in your Google Drive, that you're editing it as time goes on so that we can grade it at the end. All right. So again, so here's your power words. Oops. Now, next up, we have ecosystems are made up of biotic factors and abiotic factors. So you're going to put images in, examples. Then we have the layers of the ecosystem, how it starts with an organism, the niche, the habitat, population, community, and ecosystem. And if you have questions about that, you can see it in the last video, which is posted on YouTube. We also have some abiotic factors, and you're going to describe why these are important. Now, this is where you're going to be this week. We want to make sure that we understand what a primary consumer is, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and a decomposer. All right, so again, we're going to fill this in as we go. But this week, your focus is going to be on the food chain slide. Okay? All right, guys. Good luck. You got this.